He drove straight from a 12-hour shift, just so his daughter wouldn't feel alone tonight. He had no idea this room was about to change everything. For one moment, everything felt normal. But across the room, someone was already watching, and she didn't like what she saw. One sentence. That's all it took. She thought she was untouchable. She was about to find out how wrong she was. In front of everyone, she humiliated him. But what she didn't know would destroy everything she'd built. She thought a 7-year-old couldn't touch her. She was about to learn her biggest secret was already exposed.
If you have ever been judged before anyone even knew your story, stay until the end of this video, because what happens to this single father will remind you that karma always finds its way home. And if stories like this move you, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel, because we bring you real, raw, emotional stories every single week that will restore your faith in justice. Daniel Reyes stood at the edge of the school gymnasium, his shirt wrinkled from a 12-hour shift he had just come from, his hands still smelling faintly of engine oil, no matter how many times he had scrubbed them in the parking lot. He was 34 years old, tall, with tired eyes that still held a spark of warmth whenever they landed on his daughter, Mia, who was 7 years old, and the reason he breathed every single day. Tonight was the school's annual fall charity gala, an event where parents were expected to arrive in suits and evening gowns, where checks were written with the same ease that other people used to sign birthday cards, and where Daniel, a single father working as a mechanic, felt like an intruder in a world that was never built for people like him. He had promised Mia he would come. She had begged him for weeks, her small hands clutching his sleeve every night before bed. "Please, Daddy, everyone's parents are going. I don't want to be the only one without my dad there." And so Daniel had swapped shifts, borrowed a tie from his neighbor, and driven 40 minutes across town in his old pickup truck that coughed and sputtered every time he braked, just so his little girl wouldn't weep and have to sit alone at a table while other children beamed beside their parents. He found Mia near the dessert table, her small body swallowed by a second-hand blue dress that her aunt had given her, her hair braided by Daniel's own clumsy but loving hands. When she saw him, her whole face lit up like the string lights hanging from the gymnasium ceiling. "Daddy, you came." She threw her arms around his waist, and for a moment, nothing else in that glittering room mattered. Not the whispers, not the stares, not the woman who was already watching him from across the room with narrowed eyes and a glass of champagne balanced delicately between manicured fingers. To understand why that gymnasium felt so much like enemy territory to Daniel, you had to understand where he had come from. 5 years earlier, his wife, Mia's mother, had left in the middle of the night with a single suitcase and a note that said she wasn't built for the life of scraped-together paychecks and double shifts that marriage to a mechanic had turned out to be. Daniel had woken up to find Mia, then 2 years old, standing in her crib calling for a mother who would not answer, and in that moment, something in him had simply decided, without fanfare or hesitation, that he would be enough. Not because he felt confident he could do it alone, but because there was no one else standing in the room to do it instead. He learned to braid hair from grainy online videos watched at 2 in the morning after Mia had finally fallen back asleep. He learned which cough meant a trip to urgent care, and which one meant a warm bath and an early for bedtime. He learned to stretch a paycheck so thin it seemed to defy the laws of physics, and he learned, most importantly, that love was not a feeling you waited to arrive fully formed. It was a decision you made again and again, every single morning, whether you felt ready for it or not. That woman was Vanessa Caldwell, the president of the school's parent association, a name that carried weight in this town the way old money always does. She was elegant in the practiced way of someone who had spent a lifetime being photographed, her platinum hair pulled into a sleek chignon, her diamond earrings catching the light every time she moved her head. She ran the gala like a general commanding troops, and she had built her reputation on being the woman who made this school presentable to the wealthy donors who funded its new library and its renovated auditorium. To Vanessa, appearances were not just important, they were everything. She had noticed Daniel the moment he walked in, his rented tie slightly crooked, his shoes scuffed at the toes, standing in stark contrast to the tailored suits and Italian leather shoes around him. She did not know his name yet, She only knew that he did not belong, and belonging, in Vanessa's world, was a currency more valuable than money itself. The evening rolled on, with silent auctions and speeches about the importance of community, and Daniel did his best to stay in the background, laughing softly at Mia's jokes, helping her carry a plate of cookies back to their table, trying to be invisible in a room where invisibility felt like the safest place to be. But invisibility was a luxury Vanessa was not about to grant him. It happened during the raffle drawing, when the MC called out table numbers and prize categories, and Vanessa took the microphone to introduce the Golden Ticket Prize, a weekend stay at a lake house donated by one of the school's biggest donors. She scanned the crowd with a practiced smile, and then, for reasons that even she would later struggle to explain except through the cruelty of a bad day, compounded by champagne and self-importance, her eyes landed on Daniel. "Before we draw the winner," she said into the microphone, her voice honeyed but sharp beneath the surface, "I just want to say how touched I am that we have such a diverse turnout tonight." She let the word hang in the air like a blade. "It's wonderful to see everyone make the effort, no matter their circumstances." She turned slightly toward Daniel's table, and the spotlight, quite literally, followed her gaze. "I mean, some of our parents clearly worked very hard just to be here tonight, didn't you?" She gestured toward him with her champagne glass, a small, cutting smile playing on her lips. "I hope that tie isn't a rental. Wouldn't want you to owe someone money on top of everything else." A ripple of laughter went through pockets of the room, the kind of laughter that comes not from genuine humor, but from a nervous need to align with power. Daniel felt his stomach drop, felt the heat rise up his neck and into his ears, felt 7-year-old Mia's hand tighten around his own beneath the table. He did not respond. He had learned long ago that responding to cruelty in public only fed it more oxygen, but the damage had already been done. He could feel every eye in that gymnasium on him, could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Mia looked up at him, her lower lip trembling, confusion and hurt swimming in her wide brown eyes. "Daddy, why is that lady being mean to you?" Daniel forced a smile, the kind that fathers learn to manufacture in an instant to shield their children from the world's ugliness. "She's not being mean, sweetheart. She's just having a moment. Let's go get some punch, okay?" But as they stood to walk away, Vanessa was not finished. Perhaps it was the champagne, perhaps it was some deeper insecurity she had never confronted, but she pressed the microphone closer to her lips and added, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You know, it really does take a village to raise a child properly. Some of our families could use a little more support than others. I just hope Mia isn't missing out on opportunities other children get to have." Her eyes flicked toward Mia's second-hand dress, and the implication was as clear as a slap. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind where people did not know whether to laugh or gasp, so they simply held their breath instead. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hands, calloused and strong from years of manual labor, curled into fists at his sides. Every instinct in him wanted to say something, to defend himself, to defend his daughter, but he thought of Mia's small hand in his, and swallowed his anger whole. "Come on, baby," he whispered, guiding her toward the exit doors. "Let's go home." They did not make it to the door before an older woman intercepted them. She was in her 60s, dressed simply but elegantly in a navy dress, her silver hair cut into a neat bob, her presence radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes not from wealth but from having lived a long and observant life. Her name was Eleanor Whitfield, and though very few people in that room knew it yet, she was the actual owner of the lake house being raffled off that night, and far more significantly, she was about to become the reason Vanessa Caldwell's carefully constructed world would come crashing down. "Excuse me," Eleanor said gently, crouching slightly, so she was closer to Mia's eye level. "That's a beautiful dress you're wearing, young lady. Blue has always been my favorite color." Mia sniffled, but managed a small smile. "My aunt gave it to me. Daddy says it makes me look like a princess." "Your daddy is absolutely right," Eleanor said, and then she looked up at Daniel with something like recognition in her eyes, though he could not place where he might have seen her before. "You're a mechanic, aren't you? I recognize you. Riverside Auto Shop on 5th Street? Daniel blinked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. That's me. You fixed my grandson's car about 2 months ago. A transmission issue that 3 other shops told him would cost $4,000 to repair." You found the actual problem, fixed it for $600, and didn't charge him a diagnostic fee because he was a student. Eleanor's eyes softened. He talks about you all the time. Says you're the most honest man he's ever done business with. Daniel felt a strange, unexpected warmth cut through the humiliation still burning in his chest. That's kind of him to say. I just try to do right by people. Clearly, Eleanor said, and then, straightening up, she turned her attention toward the stage where Vanessa stood, still holding her microphone, still smiling that thin, satisfied smile of someone who believed she had just reasserted the natural order of things. Stay right here for a moment, would you? I think it's time I said a few words myself. Eleanor Whitfield walked through the crowd with unhurried confidence, and as she moved, whispers followed her like ripples on a pond. People stepped aside instinctively, the way crowds part for those who carry invisible weight. She climbed the small steps to the stage, and the MC, recognizing her immediately, handed over his microphone without question. Good evening, everyone, Eleanor began, her voice carrying an authority that needed no volume to command attention. For those who don't know me, my name is Eleanor Whitfield. I own the lake house that's being raffled off tonight. And I also happen to sit on the board of Dordia, 3 of the corporate foundations that have donated the majority of tonight's funding, including the grant that paid for this very gymnasium's renovation 2 years ago. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure, stepping back to allow Eleanor the floor while her eyes darted nervously toward the exits. I've been coming to these events for years, Eleanor continued quietly, without fanfare, because I believe charity should be about the children, not about who gets to feel important while giving it. But I have to say, what I just witnessed tonight troubled me deeply. She turned, her gaze finding Daniel and Mia standing near the back of the room. I watched a hard-working father, a man who drove here straight from a 12-hour shift just so his daughter wouldn't feel alone tonight, get humiliated in front of this entire room because his shoes weren't as polished as everyone else's. Vanessa's face had drained of color. Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You were simply cruel, Eleanor said, not unkindly, but with the unwavering calm of someone who had long ago stopped being afraid of confrontation. And I think it's worth everyone in this room knowing something else about tonight's host. She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel heavy. 3 months ago, this school's board received an anonymous complaint alleging that funds from last year's gala, nearly $40,000, were unaccounted for. The investigation was quiet, out of respect for the school's reputation, but I was on the committee that reviewed the findings. She looked directly at Vanessa now. The funds were traced to a private account linked to Mrs. Caldwell's home renovation, completed conveniently, 4 months after last year's event. Gasps rippled through the crowd, like a wave breaking against rocks. Vanessa's champagne glass trembled in her hand. That is absolutely not true. This is slander. The forensic accountant's report says otherwise, Eleanor said calmly, reaching into the small clutch purse she carried and producing a folded document, which she did not read aloud, but held up briefly for the room to see its official letterhead. The school board was going to handle this privately, allow you to quietly step down after tonight's Cation's event to avoid embarrassing the children involved. But given what you just did to that man and his daughter, in front of everyone, I no longer feel obligated to protect your dignity the way you refuse to protect his. The gymnasium had gone utterly silent, the kind of silence that feels louder than any noise. Vanessa's carefully composed mask cracked entirely now, her lips trembling, her eyes darting, around the room searching for allies who suddenly found their shoes very interesting to look at. The husband she had arrived with, a stiff, silver-haired man who ran a real estate firm, stood up slowly from his table, his expression unreadable, before quietly walking toward the exit without a single word to his wife. I want to say something, came a small voice, and every head turned to see Mia, still clutching her father's hand, stepping forward with the fearless honesty that only children possess. My daddy works really, really hard. He fixes cars all day, so I can have shoes and food and go to school. He's not rich, but he's the best daddy in the whole world, and he came here tonight even though he was so tired because he loves me. Her voice wobbled, but she pressed on. You made fun of him because his tie was a rental, but you stole money from a school. I think that makes you the one who should be embarrassed, not him. A few scattered claps broke out, quickly growing into a wave of applause that swept through the gymnasium, parents rising from their seats, some wiping their eyes, others simply nodding in solemn agreement. Daniel knelt down and pulled his daughter into his arms, his own eyes glistening now, overwhelmed not by the humiliation of moments before, but by the fierce, unwavering love and courage of the small girl who had just defended him in front of an entire room of strangers. "You didn't have to do that, baby," he whispered into her hair. "Yes, I did," Mia said simply. "You always tell me to stand up for what's right. So I did." Eleanor watched the scene unfold with a soft, knowing smile before addressing the room once more. "I think it's clear the board will be accepting Mrs. Caldwell's resignation from the Parent Association, effective immediately, along with full cooperation in the ongoing financial investigation." She turned to Daniel and Mia, her expression warming considerably. "And I think, given everything I've heard about this young man tonight, both from my grandson and from what I just witnessed, the Golden Ticket Lake House weekend should go to someone who actually deserves a break." She descended the stage steps and walked directly to Daniel, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You and your daughter are coming to my lake house this summer. No charge, no raffle needed. Consider it a long overdue thank you for the honest work you do and the beautiful daughter you're raising." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, the old reflex of a proud man unused to accepting charity rising in his throat. But Eleanor held up a hand before he could speak. "This isn't charity, Daniel. This is respect. There's a difference, and I think you of all people understand that better than most people in this room tonight." Vanessa, meanwhile, had not moved from her spot near the stage, her champagne glass still trembling in her hand, her face a mask of humiliation now mirroring, ironically, the very thing she had inflicted on Daniel just minutes before. Two members of the school board approached her quietly, their expressions grave, and escorted her toward a side room where hushed voices soon rose in tense conversation. By the following week, news had spread through the small town like wildfire, the story of the wealthy woman who had mocked a struggling single father, only to be exposed as an embezzler in front of the very community she had spent years trying to impress. In the days immediately following the gala, Daniel found himself replaying the moment on stage over and over, not the humiliation Vanessa had inflicted, but the image of his small daughter standing on shaking legs, her voice carrying farther than her tiny frame should have allowed, defending him in front of a room full of strangers who had done nothing to defend him themselves. He had always tried to teach Mia about courage in small, quiet ways, letting her order her own food at restaurants, encouraging her to raise her hand in class even when she wasn't sure of the answer, but he had never imagined that lesson would come back to him so powerfully, delivered by the very child he had been trying to protect. There were nights that week when he sat on the edge of her bed after she had fallen asleep, simply watching her breathe, overwhelmed by a gratitude too large to fit into words, grateful not for the lake house or the sudden business or the community's shifting opinion of him, but simply for the fact that somehow, despite everything they had been through, he had managed to raise a child who knew her own worth. The local newspaper picked up a small, sanitized version of the story a week later, framing it primarily around the embezzlement charges rather than the cruelty that had preceded them, though a few parents who had been in the room that night made sure the fuller story circulated through the town's group chats and coffee shop conversations regardless. Daniel found himself, uncomfortably, becoming something of a local symbol, a stand-in for every hardworking parent who had ever felt smaller in a room full of people who measured worth by the label on their shoes. He never asked for that role, and he wore it awkwardly, deflecting praise whenever it came his way, always redirecting the conversation back to Mia, as bravery rather than his own quiet endurance. "I just showed up," he would say whenever someone called him a hero. "She's the one who spoke." The weeks that followed brought changes that Daniel could never have anticipated. Eleanor, it turned out, was far more than a wealthy widow with a lake house. She sat on the boards of several local businesses and had quietly, over the years, become one of the town's most influential philanthropists, though she preferred to work behind the scenes rather than seek recognition. She began recommending Daniel's auto shop to her extensive network of friends and business associates, and within 2 months, Riverside Auto Shop had more business than Daniel could handle alone. He hired his first employee, a young man named Marcus, who had recently been released from a job, training program, and was struggling to find anyone willing to give him a chance. Daniel, remembering all too well what it felt like to be underestimated, gave him that chance without hesitation. Mia, too, found herself embraced by a community that had once overlooked her. The other mothers at school, many of whom had stayed silent during Vanessa's cruel display, began approaching Daniel with quiet apologies, inviting Mia to birthday parties and playdates she had never been invited to before. Some of it, Daniel suspected, came from genuine remorse. Some of it, he knew, came from the simple human tendency to align oneself with whoever currently held social standing. But he did not dwell on the motivations too deeply. What mattered was that his daughter no longer sat alone at lunch tables, no longer came home describing herself as the girl whose dad doesn't have a nice car. Vanessa Caldwell's story ended very differently. The investigation that Eleanor had referenced was not exaggerated for dramatic effect. It was thorough and damning. Bank records showed a clear pattern of diverted funds spanning nearly 2 years, funneled through a series of vendor invoices for services that were never actually rendered. Her husband, humiliated by the very public unraveling of his wife's secret, filed for divorce within a month, taking their 2 children with him to his sister's home across the state. Vanessa was formally charged with embezzlement and fraud, and though her expensive lawyers, Relation managed to negotiate a plea deal that spared her significant prison time in exchange for full restitution and 5 years of probation, her name became synonymous in that town with a particular kind of cautionary tale. The story, parents told their children about the dangers of building your entire identity on appearances rather than character. Daniel saw her only once more, months later, in the parking lot of a grocery store on the edge of town. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the diamonds and the tailored dresses, wearing a plain, gray coat and pushing a cart with groceries that seemed carefully budgeted rather than carelessly selected. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Daniel saw something in her expression that surprised him. Not defiance, not anger, but a raw, unguarded shame. She looked away quickly and hurried toward her car. He almost let her go without a word. Almost. But something in him, some part shaped by years of hardship and an even deeper well of empathy, that hardship often carves into good people, made him pause. "Mrs. Caldwell," he called out, and she froze, clearly bracing herself for one final humiliation, perhaps feeling she deserved it, after everything. Instead, Daniel simply said, "I hope things get better for you, truly." And then he turned and walked back toward Mia, who was waiting by their truck with a bag of apples in her small hands, and he did not look back to see the tears that finally spilled down Vanessa Caldwell's face in that quiet parking lot. Tears that came not from anger or self-pity, but from the crushing weight of finally understanding, far too late, the cruelty she had inflicted on a man who had done nothing but try to give his daughter a good life. 2 years passed. Daniel's auto shop expanded into the empty lot next door, allowing him to hire 3 more employees, each one someone the rest of the world had written off too quickly. A former addict rebuilding his life, a young mother who needed flexible hours to care for her toddler, an older man who had been told he was too old to retrain after his factory closed. Daniel built his business the same way he had raised his daughter, on the belief that people deserved a chance to prove themselves regardless of how the world had already judged them. Mia, now 9, had grown into a confident, outspoken girl who still remembered every word of what she had said in that gymnasium, though she rarely spoke about it unless someone asked. She had, in fact, become something of a minor local legend among her classmates, the girl who had stood up to Vanessa Caldwell and won. When younger students asked her about it, she always gave the same answer, simple and unwavering. "You don't have to be rich to be right. You just have to be brave enough to say what's true." Eleanor Whitfield remained a steady presence in their lives, not as a benefactor swooping in occasionally to remind them of her generosity, but as something closer to family, joining them for holiday dinners, attending Mia's school recitals, and quietly mentoring Daniel as his business grew, teaching him things about contracts and business management that he had never had the opportunity to learn. She often said that Daniel and Mia had given her something she had been missing since her own. Children moved away for their careers, a reason to feel needed again, a family to pour her wisdom and resources into, without the complicated expectations that sometimes come with blood relations. The lake house, once a raffle prize meant to reward the wealthy for showing up and writing checks, became instead a place where Daniel and Mia spent 2 weeks every summer, fishing off the dock in the early mornings, roasting marshmallows over a fire pit in the evenings, building the kind of simple, unhurried memories that no amount of money could have purchased at that original gala where everything had once felt so unfair. Looking back, Daniel never viewed that humiliating night as a tragedy. Not anymore. He saw it instead as the strange, unexpected door through which real change had walked into his life. Not because Vanessa Caldwell had cruelly opened it, but because his daughter had bravely refused to let it close on them. Kindness, he came to believe more firmly than ever, was never about the size of your bank account or the polish of your shoes. It was about what you did when no one expected anything from you at all, and it was about raising a child brave enough to speak truth to power, even when her own small voice trembled while doing it. Some nights, when the shop had gone quiet and Mia was asleep down the hall, Daniel would sit on the back porch of the little house they had carefully renovated with the extra income from the business, and he would think about how easily that night could have broken him instead of building him. He could have let the shame Vanessa tried to hand him settle into something bitter, something that taught Mia to distrust rooms full of well-dressed strangers for the rest of her life. Instead, he had chosen, in that trembling moment, to simply be steady, to let his daughter's courage do the talking, and in doing so he had taught her the one lesson he hoped she would carry longer than any other, that dignity is not something other people can hand you or take away, no matter how loudly they try. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that karma has a way of finding its own path, and that true character always rises to the surface, no matter how long it takes. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.